Welcome back to RealHouseDIY. Today I'm going to show you how to install a Schluter Ditra Heat Membrane on a plywood subfloor. The Ditra Heat Membrane, it's the same as the Ditra Mat membrane, has the uncoupling properties, so you'll have less chance of cracking tile and grout. The main difference is going to be these channels between the octagons and the height. It allows you to insert the heating cable. On the back side, you have the fleece material. So when you install this into your thin set, it's going to grab onto that fleece and make it stick down to the plywood subfloor. Now I've already gone and done a dry fit of all these pieces and cut them to size to fit the room. So these are ready to go, ready to install. For cutting these to size, it's really easy. Just bend on any of these lines. It breaks the plastic enough that you can just cut that with a pair of scissors. And depending on the size of your room and obstacles going around, you can cut right through these octagons. And when I was dry fitting these, you want to leave an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch gap around every obstacle, including the perimeter of the entire room. To prepare the surface, you want this to be level, flat, and clean. First, I got a long straight edge across this room. Everything is perfectly level and flat, except right over here. This plywood from the addition stopped right here. Had different plywood right here. So there are some slight differences with the height and some waviness. So I got the Henry 549 feather finish product. I got this really nice and flat and smooth. You can check out that other video I have on my channel, show you just how to do that. It works really well for flattening a small portion of plywood subfloor. So now I'm at the point I'm ready to install the membrane. I'm going to clear everything out of this room, vacuum, get it nice and clean. Other materials you need, I have a drop cloth on the finished floor over here, keep it clean. 5-gallon bucket for mixing a thin set. Drill with the mixing paddle. Got the 1/4 inch notch trowel. Got both a trowel and a putty knife, things for applying the thin set onto the floor. I have a float, I'll be using that just to push the membrane down onto the floor. Small bucket for water with a sponge. And I'm using the Schluter All-Set mortar. This is the one that'll make it a little bit easier for you. You can apply it both under and on top of the membrane. This is going to make it easy for you just by the one thing. Don't have to get two different thin sets, unmodified and modified. You just use this one thin set for all parts of the installation. Now my finished floor height here, this is 1 inch above the plywood subfloor. I really want my tile to come right up flush to that. So in order to get that thickness, I really want to add a 1/4 inch underlayment on top of the plywood subfloor. However, the Ditra Heat installation instructions says you can add minimum 3/8 inch underlayment. So what I'll do to try to get up to this level, I'll still use the 1/4 inch notch trowel for installation for the membrane. But then when I'm doing my tile installation, I'll use the 1/2 inch trowel. Get the thin set for the tile a little bit thicker, see if I can meet this finished floor height. Also add using these small sections of the mat instead of the roll. It's a lot easier to deal with these, especially if you're talking any small room. Usually for the floor heat, it's going to be a bathroom. I think the only time I'd use the roll of the Ditra Heat membrane is if I'm doing a really large room. This is just really easy. Fit the first one in place, fit the next one, cut a little bit off the edge. So for my project here, it's a 5.5 by 14 foot room. I ended up needing 10 sheets of the Ditra Heat membrane. What you can do, you go onto the Schluter website, they have the online calculator tool, enter the dimensions of your room, and they'll tell you exactly what you need. Okay, so next you need to accommodate the cold splice of your cable. That's this thick piece right here. Your cold lead goes up the wall to the thermostat, then your hot pilot cable runs through the floor. And in between those two, you have this cold splice. Now this is about the thickness of the membrane. So we need to cut out about 6 inches by 1 inch. So I'll notch out 6 inches by 1 inch from the orange membrane. And I'll use a chisel on the subfloor, get a little bit more out, maybe up to an 1/8 inch. So I'll be able to accommodate that cold splice, and then we can install the membrane. So there's the cutout. I'll draw on the floor. Some space to cut out in the floor. So here's that cutout. That should be just low enough to accept that cold splice and not interfere with the tile installation. So now we're ready to start installing the membrane sheets. Got the first ones in place here. 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch away from the walls. Taking a quick look for a reference point, I have these line of screws right here. So that's how far I'll go with wetting with the sponge and then getting the thin set. So I can finish this row and then move on to the ones on this side. So damp in plywood with the sponge, that'll prevent the wood from sucking moisture out of the thin set. Next is start by applying a flat level of the thin set before using the notch. What this does is it gets the thin set well applied to the plywood. Now I get that flat layer finished. Next I'm going to use the notch, about 45-degree angle. You want to make sure you go in the same direction, and then you have a full-size notch. Now we're going to put the first sheet down. Again, get it 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch away from any obstructions, including the wall. Now you want to lift up one corner, see how well applied it is to the fleece. See some spots I don't have enough, you have to build up. So if you're having trouble with this, you can use a roller to apply directly to the back of the fleece or the flat side of your trowel. This will make sure it's fully embedded into the back of the fleece. Then you just have to stick the thin set together at the floor. I'll check again. That's what you want to see. That's the really good coverage you want. I finished this first entire row. If you leave this bit on the edge here, this will start to dry up. So you want to scrape that away to reuse it right away or toss it out. I'm checking my first row with a straight edge. It's generally pretty good, but I did find 1 or 2 lumps. So I think my float was a little bit too small. I ended up getting about a 16-inch long 2x4 and moving pressure along the floor like this out to the empty space of the wood floor over here. A couple of spots been squeezing up. And then they've been nice and level after that. So I'm going to continue with that, get this perfectly flat before I do this last row. So that's an important step if you're like me and you don't have the roller. You can see that I squeezed out a lump. It was in the middle of the sheet here. Got it out the side and got that nice and flat. Really only a couple other small spots. I double checked with my long straight edge as well. Make sure it's all nice and flat. I'm finished flattening that side. Starting to work on this side. I just broom swept it. You want to watch out for any spots like this. A big clump of thin set dry right there. So make sure you're getting out of those. Sweep the floor, vacuum the floor, then it'll be good to go for the next row. So it's next day, the floor is set up, definitely good enough to walk on now. I'm definitely glad I did this in 2 different sections. 1, because I needed to mix up a little bit more thin set for the second section. And 2, it took me a little bit extra time to make sure this first section was completely flat. I'd started out using that really small float for pressing down the membrane, and turned out not to be long enough to find any bumps in the floor. So I ended up using about a 16-inch piece of 2x4. This is long enough. Pressing down, it's going to even out any small bumps. And if you want this completely perfectly flat, I found that you cannot walk on it immediately after it's in. So in the installation instructions, it's definitely a little bit misleading. They show a person rolling out the membrane and they're standing on it. So I definitely don't recommend standing on it during the installation. In terms of getting the really good coverage on the underside of the membrane, that might have been due to the consistency of my thin set. But regardless, using the flat side of the trowel, scrape a super thin layer on the underside of the membrane before applying it. It definitely adds a lot of time to the process, but then you're 100% sure that it's actually applying to the backside of the membrane, and it adds a lot of confidence in your installation. Definitely as you're installing, use a smaller level to check for flatness. Then after I've finished 5 or so sections here, I'm able to use a really long straight edge. So definitely make use of those as you go to make sure it's flat. And checking under this, you can never get exactly perfect, but everything within 1/16 of an inch at least. This worked out well here, that spot that I dug out for the cold splice. And then definitely you're gonna get tons of spots like this, which you can clean off as you go. It breaks off fairly easily afterwards. So for the most part, I made sure to flatten that across the top so it won't interfere with tile installation. And then anywhere where I need to run the wire, if I need to run the wire straight through here, for example, you can just break these off, get the wire through. Otherwise, after the wire's in place, you're gonna end up filling in all this material anyway with more thin set. So the majority of that will be fine to leave behind. I want to show you this here. So let's say you want to run that heating cable through this spot where there's some thin set stuck in there. There's no thin set on top, so that's fine for just getting the tile down. But for the heating cable, go through this way or this way, you gotta remove that thin set. And thin set does not bond to the plastic membrane. Basically, these octagon shapes have a little bit of curve underneath them. So that not only accommodates the heating cable, but it's for the thin set to grip around and into the structure. And that's what holds the thin set onto the membrane. So you see how easy this comes off. Once you loosen this thin set a little bit, and that cleanly comes out. You have the nice, clean orange plastic right underneath that. And even if you do get some thin set right on top of here where you don't want it yet, that very easily comes right off. I do have a couple spots like this. Some of the thin set got stuck between the membrane and the wall over here. I'm gonna have to chisel that out. So you really want to keep that empty space along the perimeter. Here you do the best you can to align these octagons between separate sheets. Like the ones in this direction, that's perfectly straight. However, this is off slightly, but that's still close enough for routing up the cable. So this is really the first time I've done a larger room with this product. Definitely break it up into different sections. Mix one batch thin set, do half the room, and mix another batch thin set, do the other half of the room. But for a bathroom, for example, it's only half the size of this. You can definitely do it all in one go. I'll get all the rest of the videos for this installation and playlist. Make sure you check that out. Thanks for watching.